Hey there. Today we are going to quickly run through 20 canning mistakes to avoid if you want to can efficiently and, of course, if you value your life. Number 1. Using jars that are not designed for canning. When you're shopping for jars, look for a note that says they are safe for canning. If you don't see this note and you end up purchasing jars that are not rated for the heat or the pressure, they will eventually break. Number 2. Canning with chipped or cracked jars. If chipped or cracked, jars will either break while processing, or if there's even the smallest chip in the rim of the jar, the lid may not seal properly. Inspect all jars before use. To help reduce the risk of cracking your jars or breaking them, make sure to be gentle, of course, but also don't use them for baking. Number 3, not sterilizing jars when necessary. If the processing time is not 10 minutes or longer, the jars do need to be sterilized. The recommended sterilization process is to boil the jars for a minimum of 10 minutes and longer if you are at an elevation greater than 1,000 feet. Add 1 minute for each 1,000 feet of elevation. Number 4, failing to follow a recipe. It's important to follow approved recipes closely. This includes the ingredient list and the directions. Not having the correct pH when water bath canning or not processing jars for the correct amount of time or pressure can result in the food going bad and jars not sealing. Number 5, not measuring headspace. If there is too much unfilled space between the highest point where the food is in the jar and below the lid, the jars can break while processing. If there's not enough headspace, liquid and food particles will expand and escape out of the jar. In addition to the food wasted while processing, this can also keep the lids from sealing properly if food particles get stuck between the lid and the rim of the jar. Number 6, forgetting to remove air bubbles. Forgetting to remove bubbles can result in air rising to the surface while processing and creating too much headspace. Number 7, using metal as a debubbler tool instead of plastic. While removing bubbles, be sure to use a plastic utensil instead of metal. Metal can etch the glass, causing the jars to eventually break. Number 8, forgetting to set a timer. With both canning methods, you'll need to be precise with your timing. Do not forget to set a timer. Number 9, using the wrong canning method. Foods with a pH of 4.6 or greater are considered low acid foods and need to be processed in a pressure canner. This is the only recommended method for canning poultry, seafood, meat, and veggies. Water bath canning is great for high acid foods with a pH lower than 4.6, such as fruits, pickles, jams, jellies, and fruit butters. Number 10, not filling your canner with the proper amount of water. When water bath canning, water should be filled to about 1 to 2 inches above the top of the jars. When pressure canning, add about 2 to 3 inches of water to the bottom of the pot and include 3 tablespoons of distilled white vinegar if you have it. The distilled vinegar is going to help reduce the cloudy buildup on the exterior of the jars. Number 11, not allowing the air to vent from your pressure canner before placing the weight on. Air needs to escape from the pressure canner before placing the weight on the vent. A good rule of thumb is to watch for the steam to start coming out of the vent, set a timer for 10 minutes, then place the weight when the 10-minute timer is up. Number 12, removing the weight from the vent pipe before the pressure is dropped to 0 pounds. When pressure canning, after the processing time is up and you've turned the heat off, you'll want to wait until the pressure drops to 0 pounds before removing the weight. If the pressure is not at 0 before you remove it, either the jars will break from the massive fluctuation in pressure or the liquid will be forced out of the jars. Number 13, reusing disposable lids. Once a disposable lid has been used, it shouldn't be reused a second time around as it may not seal the next time. If you're really focused on reusing lids, check out the Tatler reusable lids. I'll put a link in the description below. Number 14, forgetting to wipe the rim of the jar. After filling the jars, but before placing the lids, you'll want to wipe the rim of the jar with paper towel and distilled white vinegar. This will help to remove any food that may be sitting on top of the jar and keep it from sealing properly. Number 15, under-tightening or over-tightening bands. When placing bands on the jars, they only need to be finger tight. Over-tightened lids can prevent air from releasing. If the air is unable to escape, the lids can buckle or not seal properly. If under-tightened, the contents of the jars will likely leak out while processing. Number 16, not using canning racks. If there isn't a rack in between each layer of the jars if stacked, or in the bottom of the pan, the jars can break. Number 17, placing hot jars directly on the countertop. The contact of the hot jars and the cold countertop can cause the jars to crack. Place hot jars on a rack or on a towel until cooled. Number 18, not labeling jars. There's nothing like opening a can of pickled green beans when you're getting ready to make a green bean casserole. Labeling the name of what you canned can help you to avoid some headache. The date allows you to always be pulling the older product first and knowing when your foods expire. Number 19, improperly storing processed jars. I've mentioned before that I always remove the bands before storing. Jars also should never be stacked on top of each other. Leaving the bands on the jars or stacking the jars can keep gases from escaping or breaking that seal, and if the seal isn't broken, it's difficult to identify that something has gone bad. Jars should also be stored in a dark, cool, relatively dry place for up to 1 year. Direct sunlight can reduce the quality of the food and cause it to go bad within months rather than within a year or so. Similar to direct sunlight, the quality of the food can also be compromised if you're storing the jars in a warm or hot area. Depending on the amount of heat, the jars can also become unsealed, and of course the food would spoil quickly. The same is true if it's cold, actually. If the food freezes, it's going to expand and will likely break the seal. Another thing to consider is the humidity level. If it's too humid, the metal lids can become corroded and also result in the seals breaking. Yes, food can last longer when preserving in jars, but according to the USDA guidelines, you shouldn't exceed 1 year when preserving foods. In some cases, you're going to be perfectly fine to eat food that's been canned for over a year, but if you're unsure, play it safe and toss it out. Last but not least, number 20, failing to plan ahead. Canning is a way to save money by preserving your own foods. Be sure to never purchase your ingredients at full price. Plan ahead, watch for sales, and also try to purchase foods that are in season so that they are the best quality and have the best flavor. I hope these tips help you to avoid some of the most common mistakes so you can preserve healthy food as safely and efficiently as possible. If you're new to canning, check out our canning tools and equipment guide in the canning series. See you again soon.